As a guy who reviews video games for a living, I try to focus on games that have something going for them. Games that are fun, engaging, and that have players that keep returning to play them on a regular basis. Games that you could call cult classics. And one of the most common factors of these cult classic games is the fact that the developers know what they're doing. They don't make rash or crazy decisions, and they listen to their audience to know what players actually enjoy and what they should and shouldn't do. But then there are always the exceptions. The companies that ruin their credibility by doing ridiculous things that make you take a step back and think, did these people have brain damage? Let's take a look at Disco Elysium. This game came out in 2019 and was instantly one of the best story-based RPG games ever made. I mean, it got a 10 from most game publications, a 97% on Metacritic, and had overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam. The game pushed the concept of choices matter, and it threw you headfirst into a detective story that kept you super engaged and immersed for the entirety of your 20+ hour experience. It was awesome, and even for people who didn't want to read an entire 5,000-page novel in the form of a video game, it was a very unique experience that was a lot of fun. The game sold millions of copies, had a hardcore fan base, and even inspired Disco Elysium 2, the sequel that's currently in the works. The lead developer and creator of the title, Robert Kurvitz, and his extremely talented art director, Alexander Rostov, were the brains behind the operation. They came up with the world, story, and concept, organized the team, secured funding, and ultimately were the reason that this title became what it is today. The setting, the beauty, the nuances, the theming, the artistic flair. A lot of it could be credited to these two guys. Without them, Disco Elysium wouldn't have existed. So it comes as a huge surprise that the company that they helped to create allegedly ousted them from the team, fraudulently stole their money to illegally obtain ownership of the Disco Elysium IP, and then tried to hide it from the public by releasing a terrible meme update to a game that has serious political undertones and themes throughout the entirety of its 20+ hour runtime. Disco Elysium was stolen from its creators, and the future of the franchise is completely unclear. So let's dive into the full story, figure out how we got to this point, and talk about how Disco Elysium was stolen from its creators. But first, I want to take a second to thank the sponsor of today's video, Enlisted. Enlisted is a new kind of first-person shooter that combines PvP and PvE combat and has such varied campaigns that each one feels like an entirely different game. You can take command of a squad of customizable AI soldiers and fight in massive battles with hundreds of targets led by other players, and those varied campaigns that I mentioned a second ago offer a new experience every single time, with unique equipment, uniforms, vehicles, and locations that are true to their historical timeframes. From the outskirts of Moscow in 1941 to the heart of Berlin in 1945, the game has over 100 weapons, tanks, aircraft, and unique soldier classes from engineers to riflemen. This variation in gameplay is my favorite thing about the game, and with all the different weapons, classes, and vehicles, it really makes it infinitely replayable. Play Enlisted today on PC, Xbox, or PlayStation by using my link in the description. If you sign up right now, you can even get a free bonus pack including multiple weapons, soldiers, and a premium account. Thanks again to Enlisted for sponsoring this video. The story behind Disco Elysium is quite beautiful, and it starts with Robert Kurvitz, all the way back in 2005. Kurvitz was always an extremely creative person, and when he wasn't performing with his rock band, he was creating his own tabletop RPG with a group of friends in his hometown in Estonia. This group was frustrated that they were poor, and they felt like they needed a way to get their creative expressions out into the world. So they got together and formed a creative collective that would later be named ZAUM. ZAUM worked together on music, paintings, and books, and mainly acted as an outlet for creative expression and support, but that was about it. In their spare time, the members of ZAUM continued to build out and play this tabletop game, and eventually had a full-fleshed world and setting that caught the attention of two important people in this story: Alexander Rostov, a local artist, and Kaur Kinder, a writer. Both of these guys were impressed with Kurvitz and ZAUM's creative abilities, and they joined the team to be a part of future projects. The first of which was a novel called Sacred and Terrible Air, and took place in the fictional world of Elysium that Kurvitz and his friends had built for their tabletop game. The novel took over 5 years to write, and when it was finally released, it got positive reviews. But from a commercial standpoint, it absolutely flopped, and only sold about 1,000 copies, which caused Kurvitz to fall into an alcoholic stupor that put his life on a downward spiral. But he was pulled out of it by Alexander Rostov and Kaur Kinder, who came to the conclusion that the trio should partner and work together on a video game set in the world that the novel was based around. They had a vision for something bigger, and they got together to write a one-pager that explained what the world of Disco Elysium would later become. AD&D meets 70s cop show in an original fantastic realist setting, with swords, guns, and motor cars. Massive reactive story, exploring a vast poverty-stricken ghetto. Deep strategic combat. And if you've played Disco Elysium, you know that the team pulled off this vision. In fact, they did an amazing job at it. They put their heart and soul into this game, and would spend 4 years developing it from a derelict, run-down building in their hometown in Estonia. In a city that didn't even have a game development industry, made by people who had no game development experience. It was a long shot from the start, but they pulled it off. It was a very experimental process, with Robert Kurvitz and Alexander Rostov spearheading the operation, working for hours on end in the same room. Rostov painting the scenes that Kurvitz wrote, and Kurvitz coming up with new story ideas based off of Rostov's paintings. They did this in the dirty, old, abandoned building for a few years until they used Kaur Kinder's business expertise to gain funding and expand the development team into a real studio, creating a true game development company in the process. With Kurvitz as the lead designer, Rostov as the art director, and Kaur Kinder as the lead producer, the studio was created and funded by a businessman named Margus Linnamai. Linnamai was the sole reason that Disco Elysium was able to become what it's known for today. He provided the funding that allowed ZAUM to become official and hire over 30 team members that would work directly on the title. And he gave them the freedom to do it how they wanted. He trusted the vision and the creative process and allowed ZAUM to make Disco Elysium without much interference or resistance. And everyone worked happily together to make that happen. But things changed in 2021 when Linnamai decided that he wanted out of ZAUM due to some other controversies that were going on with his popular Estonian newspaper. So his majority ownership in the studio was purchased by another businessman named Ilmar Kompis. Now, here's where the story gets a bit messy, and it's honestly kind of insane. Shortly after Kompis took over the company, Kurvitz, Rostov, and Kinder were removed from the company. The ZAUM Cultural Association, the creative collective that started it all, was dissolved, and the people who poured their heart and soul into the project to create one of the best RPGs ever made were no longer a part of the team that they founded. In a blog post shared by Rostov and Kurvitz, the following happened. As soon as they became majority shareholders, we were quickly excluded from daily operations, our employment was terminated, and our access to the company's information was shut off. Our firing came weeks after we started asking for documents and financial data, which is still being kept from us. As for Kinder, he was allegedly ousted from the company as well after asking the new owners about future plans for Disco Elysium 2 and questioning their financials. It sounds simple. The new owners didn't like the original creators of the game, so they removed them from the company. But why would they do that? Well, that's where the story gets a little bit more complicated. And I have to say, it involves a lot of fraud and greed. In order to understand this, we need to talk about the sequence of events that led to ZAUM being acquired by Kompis in the first place. See, there was another company that owned a portion of ZAUM. This company was called Yes or Nor Ltd, and the director of this company is the girlfriend of our newest character, Tones Howell. Howell worked at ZAUM as the executive producer for Disco Elysium, and he plays a big role in this scheme. See, Howell has a history. Back in 2016, he was fined over 12 million euros for being involved in a pyramid scheme that he tried to start in Azerbaijan. So this shows that maybe he wasn't the best guy to be involved with in the first place. The original majority shareholder who wanted out, Margus Linnamai, was looking for 4.8 million euros in exchange for his shares of the company. Kompis wanted to buy the company. But instead of simply buying out Linnamai with his own money, he worked alongside Howell to construct a corrupt and complex scheme to obtain ownership without spending a penny, by using the funds from the company to pay for the purchase of the company. They took money from ZAUM to buy ZAUM, and the way they did it was insane. Howell's girlfriend, who was the director of the company that owned part of ZAUM, sold some physical concept art sketches to Kompis for a whopping £1. Kompis then took these sketches and sold them back to ZAUM for, you guessed it, 4.8 million euros. So the money was taken out of the ZAUM bank account and put directly into Compass's bank account to basically reimburse himself for the purchase of the company. And the trio that was fired were still minority shareholders in ZAUM, which means that it was their money too. After this fraudulent acquisition, the new owners took steps to reduce the amount of power that the original owners had by demoting them from partial owners to basic level writers and artists. These demotions caused Rostov and Kurvitz to be frustrated, which resulted in them being ousted out from the company in the hopes that Compass and Havel would now have full control of everything. Compass didn't care about the longevity of the studio, and he only wanted an opportunity to sell it to larger publishers like Tencent and Microsoft and to cash out money from this fraudulent deal. And this is in entirely on-brand fashion, considering that Howell was convicted of fraud, put in prison, and forced to pay back nearly 12 million euros for a pyramid scheme he tried to start a few years earlier. The entire situation is filled with red flags, and Howell's involvement at all already triggers an alarm. He couldn't buy the company because he owed 12 million euros to the government, so he used his girlfriend as a pawn to get his friend Compass to buy the company for him. And while this takeover was extremely questionable, it didn't change the outcome. The trio are still unaffiliated with the new ZAUM, and at the end of 2022, multiple lawsuits were filed against Compass to make him repay the money that he stole for the acquisition. The money was repaid to the studio, which caused Kender to drop his case, but Rostov and Kurvitz are continuing to push for wrongful dismissal and claiming that paying back the money doesn't fix the problem, and doesn't change the fact that majority ownership in ZAUM was acquired through fraud. Even with all of this, ZAUM is claiming that Disco Elysium 2 is still under development, without the original team members involved. Because that'll definitely reassure the fanbase of a game with a cult following who loves the creators that it's in good hands. Yeah, that's a great one. Good job, guys. You really solved the PR problem. These people are so out of touch that unless Kurvitz and Rostov win the case, Disco Elysium 2 is probably not in good hands. Sure, maybe it could still be a good game, but I don't see the value in supporting it without the original creators being involved. And best of all, in the middle of this entire lawsuit and PR disaster, the team at ZAUM decided to release a photo mode meme update in the hopes that, maybe this little update here will draw some of the limelight away from the bad things going on. Because I'm sure a lot of journalists are gonna make a lot of time creating articles on how a photo mode for a story-based RPG is the most revolutionary thing in gaming history. The irony in this entire thing is that Disco Elysium was centered around a politically charged, anti-capitalist message. And the thing that destroyed this lovely game is the same thing that the game was preaching against. We'll have to continue to watch and see what's happening with this situation because it is by far one of the most interesting stories I've seen in gaming in a very long time. So if you want to keep up to date with that, go and follow me on Twitter. I'll post updates as they come out, and if the situation unfolds to be even more complex, I'll make another video. But for now, we're just gonna have to wait and see if this game has a future. What are your thoughts on the situation? Do you think there's more to it than initially meets the eye? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to check out Enlisted by using my link in the description and play it today to get a free bonus pack and support the channel. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you next time, and peace.